Kierkegaard's life was packed with emotional battles that became the soul of his writings. Think about this. He broke off his engagement to Regine Olsen, convinced his own melancholy, and what he saw as his religious calling made marriage impossible, a decision that brought him a lifetime of regret and fueled works like Repetition. Then there was the Corsair affair. After he provoked a satirical magazine, he was relentlessly mocked in public, with cartoons even making fun of how he looked, pushing him further into isolation. His father's strict, guilt-ridden piety and losing most of his siblings early on also profoundly shaped his deep dives. His idea of the leap of faith is super famous, not about logical proofs, but a passionate, non-rational jump into the unknown. He loved using pseudonyms, an unconventional approach, sometimes blurring the lines between author and text, but perhaps most daring was his attack on what he called Christendom, the comfy, institutionalized Danish church, arguing real Christianity demanded serious personal sacrifice. His public blasts definitely didn't win him many friends. Interestingly, his work wasn't an instant hit. A critic, Georg Brandes, helped put him on the map, though not everyone agreed. Some, like Adolf Holt, felt Brandes' take was a misconstruction. Kierkegaard's big idea that truth is personal, not just a pile of facts. This is perhaps the core of his whole philosophy. In particular, he believed that real truth is something you deeply commit to with your entire being. This totally rocked the boat, challenging the big Hegelian view at the time that truth could all be systematized into universal principles. He famously declared using his pen name Johannes Climacus in the work concluding Unscientific Postscript that truth is subjectivity, a statement also noted by academic resources like the Stanford Encyclopedia. For Kierkegaard, objective truths like scientific facts or historical details are fine, but they're secondary to subjective truths, the kind that grab your intellect, your emotions, and your will. When it comes to faith, this idea of subjectivity means that religious truth isn't something you can prove with reason or evidence, it's something you have to embrace with a personal, passionate commitment. Kierkegaard illustrates this with his famous concept of the leap of faith, where you choose to believe in God even without any solid rational certainty. This really shines through when he talks about Christianity, which he viewed as inherently paradoxical and kind of absurd, requiring a personal leap beyond what pure reason can offer. For example, in Philosophical Fragments, he digs into how the paradox of Christ's incarnation demands a personal response from you, not just an intellectual nod. This whole focus on subjectivity was a game-changer, shifting philosophy away from abstract systems and onto the lived experience of the individual, really influencing the existentialist thinkers who came later. Kierkegaard's fascinating insight is that life unfolds in distinct stages: the aesthetic, the ethical, and the religious, each a totally different way of engaging with the world. Someone in the aesthetic stage is all about immediate pleasure, chasing sensory experiences mainly to avoid boredom at all costs. Think of his seducer character who hops from one fleeting pleasure to another, ultimately facing despair as life lacks deeper meaning. Then there's the ethical stage, all about committing to moral principles, much like Judge William championing marriage and duty. Yet, Kierkegaard argues even this stage has its limits. It can't quite tackle all those deep existential questions. Beyond the ethical lies the religious stage, the highest of them all. This means forging a personal relationship with God, often through what Kierkegaard famously called a leap of faith. He uses Abraham's willingness to sacrifice Isaac to really drive this home, an absolute faith that goes way beyond standard ethical rules. This stage involves embracing the absurd and surrendering to a divine will, but it's here that true selfhood is found. Kierkegaard also pointed out, the higher stages don't just wipe out the lower ones, saying, quote, "The religious does not abolish the aesthetic, it merely dethrones it. Ultimately, to live authentically, you've got to move past surface pleasures and even ethical duties towards a deep, faith-based commitment." Kierkegaard viewed anxiety and despair as core parts of being human, popping up because we're free and have to take responsibility for ourselves. He once described anxiety as the dizziness of freedom, that feeling you get when your spirit wants to make sense of everything, but freedom just looks down into all its own possibilities. This anxiety, comes from knowing you're free to choose, which is exciting because of all the potential, but also pretty scary. That dizziness is all about facing endless possibilities while still being, well, just you, a limited human. Then there's despair, which Kierkegaard saw as the big failure to become your true self. He called it the sickness of the spirit that cannot die, yet is already dead. A pretty heavy thought. Despair can look like a few different things. Maybe you don't want to be who you are, or you're always wishing you were someone else, or sometimes you're in despair and don't even know it. For Kierkegaard, the self is a tricky mix of the everyday finite stuff and the grander infinite stuff, and despair happens when that mix gets all messed up. The only way out, he believed, was through faith. Faith, in his view, lines you up with God and makes an authentic life possible. So Kierkegaard's ideas about anxiety and despair really show how he thought human life is just full of this inner tension. A tension that, for him, could only be truly sorted out through a deep religious commitment. Kierkegaard felt the official church had kind of lost the plot. For him, true Christianity wasn't just cultural. Faith needed to be deeply personal, as if God's requirement was spoken to me alone, involving real sacrifice. He championed a New Testament Christianity, demanding existential risks, a far cry from the Danish church's Christendom, a comfortable, socially acceptable system he attacked in works like The Moment. This institutionalized religion, he argued, was a watered-down version, rarely pushing people to authentic transformation. As you can guess, this was super controversial, setting him against the religious bigwigs. It even led to his nephew Henrik Lund protesting at Kierkegaard's funeral that the official church was burying a man who would have wanted nothing to do with it. One of Kierkegaard's most distinctive features is his use of indirect communication. He believed that life's biggest truths can't just be handed to you but have to be discovered for yourself. Think of it like this. Instead of giving you a straight answer, he'd use crafty tools like pen names, a bit of irony, or even parables. He did this to show off different ways of looking at things, really nudging you to actively engage with his ideas. But why all the cloak and dagger? Part of his thinking was, as he explains in concluding Unscientific Postscript, I ask for nothing better than to be known in our objective times as the only person who was not capable of being objective. So when he used names like Johannes de Silentio in Fear and Trembling or Anticlimacus in The Sickness unto Death, he was creating these characters who embodied specific life views. This let him dive into really complex issues, like the tension between faith and reason, without presenting a single authoritative stance. Kierkegaard's method pushes you, the reader, to face these paradoxes of existence head-on and make your own existential choices. This whole indirect approach lines up perfectly with his big emphasis on subjectivity. In other words, it prioritizes that you personally grab hold of truth, rather than just passively accepting what someone else tells you.